It was, without a doubt, the single most destructive conflict in all of human history. A true total war that stretched across the entire globe, completely erasing the line between the battlefield and the home front. So, how did it happen? And maybe more importantly, what can its legacy teach us today? Let's get into it.
Just look at this number, 70 to 85 million people. To really put that in perspective, that's more than the entire population of a country like the UK or France today. It's a scale of loss that's, well, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And for the first time in a major war, civilian deaths actually outnumbered the deaths of soldiers.
So that's the big question, right? How? How did the world plunge into such a catastrophic nightmare? That's what we're going to unpack here. We're going to look at the chain of events that led to the war and the consequences that are still shaping the world we live in right now.
Okay, Section 1, a world ready for war. It's so important to get this. World War II didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It wasn't one single event, but a perfect storm of things that had been brewing for like 2 decades. The 1930s were basically a tinderbox, just waiting for a spark. You can almost think of it like a recipe for total disaster. Each ingredient just made the whole situation worse. First, you had the Treaty of Versailles, which left Germany feeling humiliated and wanting revenge. Then, bam, the Great Depression hits, creating worldwide economic desperation. And that made people really vulnerable to radical leaders, which led to the rise of these aggressive fascist regimes in Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the whole time, the one organization that was supposed to keep the peace, the League of Nations, well, it was completely powerless to stop any of it. It was like a domino effect of disaster. And this was the final piece of the puzzle, the Nazi-Soviet pact. In a move that shocked everybody, Hitler and Stalin agreed not to fight each other. They were secretly planning to just carve up Poland between them. This cynical deal protected Germany from a two-front war, and it gave Hitler the green light he was waiting for. When Germany rolled into Poland, that was the final straw. Britain and France had to declare war, and the global conflict was on. All right, Section 2, the Axis on the march. The first few years of the war, let's say 39 to 41, were just defined by unbelievable speed and total Axis dominance. For a while there, it really looked like they were absolutely unstoppable. So let's meet the main players. On one side, you've got the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy, all of them driven by conquest. On the other side, the Allied powers, led at the beginning by Great Britain and France. But here is the crucial part. You can see it right there. 2 future giants, the Soviet Union and the United States. They weren't in the fight yet. The secret to Germany's insane early success was this one tactic, blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Forget the slow, grinding trench warfare of World War I. This was all about speed. Coordinated, overwhelming attacks with tanks and planes to just shatter enemy lines. And the results? They were devastating. Poland fell in weeks, then Denmark, Norway, and this was the real shocker, France. France collapsed in just 6 weeks. So by the summer of 1940, Britain was literally the last one standing, the last democracy in Europe fighting Hitler. The German Air Force pounded the country day and night during the Battle of Britain, trying to soften it up for an invasion. But, inspired by the incredible words of their new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, the Royal Air Force fought back, and they won. They stopped the invasion and kept the hope of victory alive. Okay, Section 3, turning the tide. So even with Britain hanging on, the Axis still pretty much had the upper hand. But all of that changed between 1941 and 1943. A series of massive, game-changing events completely flipped the script, pulling in new powers and opening up huge new fronts. The first huge turning point was Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union. In a stunning betrayal of his pact with Stalin, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history. He was gambling on a quick win, but the whole thing got bogged down in the brutal Russian winter. And in doing so, he opened the Eastern Front, which would become the absolute bloodiest theater of the entire war. At the same time, on the other side of the planet, Japan made its own fateful gamble. The surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor was, yeah, a tactical success, but it was a massive strategic blunder. It woke up the sleeping giant and brought the full weight of the United States, its incredible industrial and military power, known as the arsenal of democracy, crashing into the war on the Allied side. And this slide, wow, it just lays it all out perfectly. In 1941, the Axis was at the absolute peak of its power. But by 1943, the tide had completely turned. In North Africa, the British stopped the Axis at El Alamein, and, most importantly, on the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army surrounded and just annihilated an entire German army at Stalingrad. After Stalingrad, Germany would be in constant retreat in the East. The end was no longer a question of if, but when. Section 4, Victory in Europe. This brings us to the final phase of the war in Europe. With the tide now turned, the Allies began the long, bloody process of closing the net on Germany from all sides, getting ready for that final push into the heart of the Reich. Over 150,000 men. That is the number of Allied soldiers, American, British, Canadian, who landed on the beaches of Normandy, France on a single day, June 6, 1944, D-Day. It was the largest amphibious invasion in all of human history. The second D-Day succeeded. It was truly the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. This was it. This finally opened that massive Western Front that Stalin had been begging for years. The Allies now had a solid foothold in France and began the slow, brutal fight inland. Germany was now caught in the exact nightmare scenario Hitler had tried so hard to avoid. A massive war on two fronts. You can see it here. As the Western Allies pushed in from France, the Soviet Red Army was just relentlessly advancing from the east, squeezing the Nazi regime in a death grip between them. Germany threw everything it had left into one final desperate attack in the winter of '44, the Battle of the Bulge. It failed. It just used up their last reserves. By the spring of '45, Soviet troops were storming Berlin. On April 30th, Hitler killed himself. Just about a week later, on May 8th, Germany offered its unconditional surrender. VE Day. The war in Europe was finally over. Okay, Section 5, A World Remade. But victory in Europe didn't mean the end of the story. The war left behind a level of destruction that just fundamentally remade the entire global order, with consequences that are still very much with us today. As Allied soldiers advanced, they started to uncover the industrial-scale horror of the Holocaust. Liberating the concentration and death camps revealed the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, along with millions of other victims. It was a crime so monstrous, so beyond anything the world had ever seen, that we had to create a new word for it: genocide. The world that came out of all that rubble was completely transformed. Even though the war in Europe was over, the fight in the Pacific raged on until the United States dropped atomic bombs on Japan, kicking off the nuclear age and forcing a surrender. Out of the ashes, a new world order was born. The old US-Soviet alliance fell apart, starting the Cold War. A new United Nations was created to try and stop another war like this. And Europe itself was split in two by what Churchill famously called an Iron Curtain. And what this all really boils down to is a fundamental shift in global power. The old European empires, Britain and France, were bankrupt and exhausted. They were eclipsed. And in their place, two new massive superpowers rose up to dominate the rest of the 20th century: United States and the Soviet Union. Which leaves us with one final thought. The generation that lived through World War II built a whole new global system: the UN, international law, new alliances, all designed with one single purpose: to make sure this never, ever happened again. And for over 75 years, it's worked. But looking at the world today, you have to ask yourself, are those institutions still enough to handle the challenges we're facing now?